If you're scrolling through your news feed right now, you're probably seeing the exact same uh, glaring contradiction that I am.
Oh, the EV market doom and gloom.
Exactly. On one hand, the headlines are screaming that the electric vehicle market is just stalling out. Sales are slowing, the hype is over, everyday drivers are retreating back to gas.
Right, that's the public narrative.
But then, I mean, if you just look out the window, if you look at the actual concrete being poured and the permits being pulled across the country, the hard data tells a completely different, frankly, explosive story.
The disconnect between the social media narrative and the physical reality is massive right now.
It really is.
The cultural conversation is entirely focused on a deceleration, but the infrastructure developers on the ground are accelerating on a scale we just haven't witnessed in decades. They're operating on a completely different timeline.
I find the sheer scale of this rollout so fascinating, especially because it contradicts the conventional wisdom right now. And so that is our mission for this deep dive. Welcome in.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're cutting through all the noise to look at the hard empirical data behind the EV charging boom. We're going to explore the macro numbers, the sometimes brutal reality of what happens when you actually pull up to a charger, and the wild new mobile solutions being deployed by everyone, from autonomous robotaxis to the U.S. Air Force.
Yeah, to get a clear picture for you, we are synthesizing a pretty massive stack of intelligence today.
We really are.
For the macro view, we're looking at Perrin's definitive 2025 State of the U.S. Fast Charging Report. But to understand the actual user experience, we are pairing that with a rigorous reliability study published by OSTI.
Right, conducted by researchers out in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Exactly. And we also have fleet utilization projections from AutoFleet, alongside some recent strategic moves by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and the mobile charging company Exos.
It's a lot of ground to cover. But let's start with the macro picture, because the Perrin 2025 report proves that infrastructure developers are playing a really long game here.
Oh, absolutely. The numbers are staggering.
Yeah, 2025 was a record-shattering year. Over 18,000 new direct current fast charging ports. Those are the high-speed DCFC ports were deployed.
Which represents a 30% year-over-year increase.
Right, pushing the U.S. past 70,000 total fast charging ports.
But what stands out in Perrin's data isn't just the sheer volume of hardware hitting the ground.
No.
It's the fact that demand is scaling perfectly alongside that new supply. There's this common assumption that these new stations are being built and just sitting empty, acting as stranded assets.
Which makes sense if you buy into the stalling out headline.
Right, but the data proves otherwise. In 2025, there were 141 million charging sessions nationwide, which is also a 30% increase. The hardware deployment and the actual usage are stepping forward in total lockstep.
Wait, I actually want to look closer at that usage metric, because the data says the average utilization rate across the country remains incredibly stable at around 16%.
Yep, 16%.
That means the charger is essentially sitting empty 84% of the time. How on earth does an operator make a profit or even justify the capital expenditure when their really expensive equipment is sitting idle for most of the day?
I know it seems counterintuitive, but 16% is actually the mathematical sweet spot for public infrastructure.
Really?
Yeah, it breaks down to about 200 to 220 charging sessions per port per month. For the operator, the initial capital expenditure of installing the charger is high, but the operational cost of dispensing electrons is relatively low.
Okay, so once it's in the ground, it's cheap to run.
Exactly. So hitting that 15 to 20% utilization band is where the revenue from the power sold comfortably covers the maintenance and financing, and it generates a profit.
Ah, I see.
If utilization drops to 5%, the operator bleeds money. But if it climbs to 30%, the station becomes a bottleneck. Drivers arrive, find every plug taken, and are forced to wait in massive queues, which obviously ruins the customer experience.
So they're walking this tightrope between profitability and congestion.
Just so.
And to manage that, the physical footprint of these stations is getting huge. I saw the notes on the new Tesla site in Lost Hills, California.
Oh, yeah, that site is incredible.
164 ports at a single location.
Yeah.
I mean, that isn't a gas station. That's practically a small town of chargers.
Well, Tesla fundamentally pioneered that mega station model. They recognized early on that scaling up the number of ports per site reduces the per unit installation cost.
Right, economies of scale.
And it creates a highly reliable destination for drivers. They deployed 37.6% of all new ports in 2025. But interestingly, Their overall market share is actually dropping.
which feels like a paradox considering how much they're building.
It does, but it really just reflects how fast the rest of the market is maturing. Competitors like ChargePoint, Ready, and Iona are expanding so aggressively that Tesla's piece of the pie is shrinking.
Even though the pie itself is growing exponentially.
Exactly. And these non-Tesla networks are abandoning the old strategy of, putting two slow chargers behind a dark grocery store. They are adopting Tesla's mega hub playbook.
And they're focusing on raw speed, too. In the fourth quarter of 2025, 51% of the newly deployed non-Tesla ports were ultra-fast.
Meaning they can push 250 kilowatts of power or more.
Right. The industry is clearly trying to move past the days where you had to sit in the parking lot for 2 hours just to get enough juice to get home.
Because the consumer market demands that the EV experience mirrors the internal combustion experience. Drivers want to pull in, get hundreds of miles of range in 15 minutes, and get back on the road.
Yes, totally.
The deployment of these 250 kilowatt chargers is the technological bridge to make that happen.
Now, one data point in the parent report genuinely surprised me. Over the past few years, we've heard endless coverage about the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program.
The federal funding, right?
Yeah, billions of federal dollars were allocated to build out a national network. Yet, according to the data, NEV funding only accounted for about 3% of the new infrastructure deployed in 2025.
Which is just 497 ports.
Exactly, it's tiny.
Well, the reality of federal infrastructure spending is that it moves at the speed of bureaucracy.
True.
The money is slowly grinding its way through environmental reviews, local permitting, and utility interconnection queues. But the private sector understands that the transition won't wait for paperwork.
So this boom is overwhelmingly private-led.
Overwhelmingly.
It reminds me entirely of the telecom boom in the late 1990s. Telecom companies spent billions laying thousands and thousands of miles of underground fiber optic cables.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. At the time, skeptics thought they were crazy for building this massive bandwidth capacity slightly ahead of the demand curve. But those companies were confident that if they built the pipes, the internet traffic would eventually come.
And they were right.
They were. That dark fiber became the foundation of the modern internet. And it seems like these private charging operators are doing the exact same thing. They're laying the groundwork for the fleet of 2030, confident that the vehicles are coming.
The analogy holds up really well. The physical network has to exist before the mass market user base can fully materialize. I mean, you cannot sell a mainstream consumer a car if they don't believe they can fuel it.
Exactly. But laying the fiber optic cable is a great first step. But if the router in your living room is broken, you still don't have internet.
Very true.
So let's pivot and look at what actually happens when a driver pulls up to one of these 70,000 new ports. Because the macro data paints a very rosy picture of reliability.
It does. Perrin's nationwide data shows an average reliability rate of 93.3%.
Which sounds great.
On a spreadsheet, it looks fantastic. It implies that more than 9 times out of 10, a driver will have a completely seamless experience. But the OSTI study reveals a jarring disconnect when you measure human experience rather than software metrics.
Okay, tell me about the OSTI study.
So researchers went into the San Francisco Bay Area, arguably the most mature EV market in the country, and physically tested 655 public CCS ports. Those are the standard used by non-Tesla vehicles.
And what did they find?
They found that only 73.3% were actually functional.
Wow, a 20-point drop. If I'm a driver relying on that infrastructure, the difference between 93% and 73% is literally the difference between getting to work on time and being stranded on the side of the road.
Yeah, it's massive.
How is the industry claiming a number so much higher than what researchers physically experienced?
It all comes down to the definition of the word functional. The industry figures are generally based on automated software pings.
Oh, so it's just a computer checking in.
Right. The charging station sends a signal to the central server saying, I have grid power and my computer is on, and the system logs that station as having 100% uptime.
Even if the screen is broken or the card reader is jammed.
Exactly. The OSTI researchers, however, defined functionality by whether the machine actually did its job. For them, a charger was only marked functional if it successfully dispensed electricity to the car for 2 continuous minutes without the user needing to call customer service.
And we have to talk about what calling customer service actually entails, because the pilot test for this study found that an average call to get a broken charger working took 16 minutes.
16 minutes.
Yeah, and even after sitting on hold and troubleshooting with the technician, it rarely resulted in a successful charge anyway.
Look, if a piece of public infrastructure requires a 16-minute phone call to dispense basic utility service, it is fundamentally broken.
Absolutely. And if you're listening to this and you have ever had to sit out in the rain trying 3 different credit cards on a blank, unresponsive screen, you know exactly what this OSTI data represents.
It's infuriating.
The study breaks down this concept of the waterfall payment nightmare. When testers simply tried to pay with a credit card, only 50.3% of the successful charges worked on the very first insert.
Barely a coin flip.
Why is a card reader on an EV charger so much worse than the card reader on a standard gas pump?
So the mechanism behind the failure usually isn't the physical card reader itself, it's the cellular handshake. Traditional gas stations have hardwired intranet connections that securely process transactions in milliseconds.
Right, they're physically wired into the building.
Exactly. EV chargers, however, are frequently installed in the furthest corners of concrete parking garages or out in remote retail lots. They rely entirely on cellular signals to process the API handshake with the banking network.
Ah, so it's a cell service issue.
Yeah, when that cell signal drops, or if the internal modem loses connection, the card reader simply times out and the transaction fails, leaving the user with a blank or frozen screen.
That perfectly explains why the OSTI testers found that for 25% of users, the credit card readers failed entirely, forcing them to download a specific network app or use a proprietary RFID membership card just to get the machine to dispense power.
Which is just a terrible user experience.
Yes. Imagine pulling up to a gas pump, inserting your Visa, and having the screen tell you that you must download the Exxon app, create an account, and input your billing details before you can buy fuel.
There would be a revolt.
Totally. People would lose their minds.
It really highlights a severe lack of interoperability in the current ecosystem. And, the friction isn't just limited to software. The researchers documented significant physical design flaws, too.
Physical flaws? Like what?
Well, for 3.2% of the chargers they tested primarily at Electrify America stations, the physical charging cable was simply too short to reach the charge port on the Chevy Bolt they used for the test.
Because the Bolt has its charge port located on the driver's side front fender.
Right.
And the charging station was designed assuming the car would back in with a rear port.
Exactly.
Why not just make the cables longer? Like, the retractable hoses at the gas station.
I know it sounds simple, but it's a physics problem. Liquid fuel hoses are light and flexible, but a DC fast charging cable pushing 350 kilowatts generates an immense amount of heat.
Oh, so they need cooling.
Right. To prevent the cable from melting, it requires thick internal liquid cooling lines, making the cable incredibly heavy, thick, and stiff. You cannot easily put a heavy liquid-cooled cable on a simple retractable reel.
So you're just stuck pulling your car into weird angles.
Yeah, and until vehicle manufacturers standardize where the charge port is located on the car itself, this physical mismatch is going to continue to plague users.
Wow. So if a quarter of the chargers out there are effectively bricked for the average user, whether due to a bad cell signal or a cable that won't reach, that means the remaining 75% are absorbing all of the traffic.
Which brings us right to the reality of congestion.
Exactly. The 16% national utilization average we discussed earlier hides some extreme regional bottlenecks. In Washington, D.C., the utilization rate is an astonishing 32.2%.
Which is more than 12 charging sessions per port per day.
And Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Miami are all consistently operating above 25% utilization. Meanwhile, a state like Alaska sits at just 3.2%.
And when utilization crosses that 25% threshold in a major metro area, drivers are no longer just pulling up and plugging in. They are idling in lines.
And that congestion completely changes the economic model. The pricing data across the country shows that the national average sits in a tight band, typically between 45 cents and 53 cents per kilowatt hour.
With a few regional outliers, of course.
Right. Hawaii pays a premium at 86 cents due to their isolated grid, and New Jersey is surprisingly high at 63 cents. But nationally, about 80% of stations still use a fixed pricing model. You pay the exact same rate, whether it's 2.00 a.m. or 5:00 p.m.
But in those highly congested metros, fixed pricing is becoming untenable. Operators are rapidly shifting to time-of-use pricing, or TOU.
Or like surge pricing.
The logic is identical to surge pricing on an Uber, or the off-peak electricity rates you might have for your home. If every commuter tries to charge at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday in Los Angeles, the queue will spill out into the street.
Right, it's a nightmare.
So, by significantly raising the price per kilowatt hour during those peak hours, Operators incentivize drivers who have flexibility to charge at 10 a.m. or late at night, flattening out the demand curve.
There's a fascinating insight hidden in the parent data regarding this pricing. Because 80% of the stations fall into that exact same mid-tier pricing band around 50 cents, operators aren't actually competing on price.
No, they're not.
If the charger across the street is 2 cents cheaper, the average driver doesn't care. They care if the machine works and if they feel safe. So operators are realizing they must compete on retail amenities and location.
Exactly.
Like, do you have a squeegee to wash my windshield? Is there a clean restroom and a decent coffee shop? Is the canopy well lit at night?
The industry is undergoing a psychological shift from a pure utility mindset to a hospitality mindset. But, everyday commuters aren't the only ones driving this congestion.
Oh, right, fleets.
Yes, commercial fleets and rideshare operations are a massive factor here. Autofleet's projections for 2026 show that fleet operators are building incredibly sophisticated software systems to navigate these exact infrastructure bottlenecks.
Because if you're managing a fleet of 1,000 delivery vans or an autonomous robo-taxi service, a 16-minute customer service call or a 30-minute wait in line isn't just an annoyance. It actively destroys your daily profit margin.
When you are managing commercial logistics, downtime is your greatest enemy. Autofleet's data reveals that by implementing AI route optimization, fleets are reducing their charging-related downtime by up to 71%.
71%, that's huge.
It is. The AI integrates real-time charger availability, traffic data, and predictive maintenance schedules. They aren't just sending a van to the nearest charger. The system actively routes the vehicle to a specific charger that its predictive models guarantee will be empty and functional precisely when the van arrives.
They are essentially treating the regional charging network like a giant dynamic chessboard. And looking at the Autofleet data, they also dug deep into the total cost of ownership, or TCO, for these fleets. The data shows that for internal combustion engine fleets, the Toyota Corolla still leads the pack for the best residual value and predictability.
Makes sense.
But on the EV side, the Hyundai Kona is performing best for total cost of ownership. Why does the Kona specifically win out over everything else available?
It really comes down to predictability and efficiency at high mileage. The battery degradation curves on the Kona have proven to be highly stable over hundreds of thousands of miles, meaning fleet operators don't have to factor in early battery replacement costs.
So the battery lasts.
Yes. And additionally, its energy efficiency, the amount of miles it gets per kilowatt hour, drastically outpaces heavier electric SUVs.
Less weight means less power used.
Right. And when you factor in the lower repair costs and the fact that its lighter weight doesn't chew through expensive tires as quickly as heavier EVs do, the operational costs just drop to a level that makes the math undeniably attractive for fleet managers.
The math totally validates the transition for fleets, but honestly, it highlights a massive bottleneck.
Oh, a huge one.
If public chargers are already swamped in major cities, and building new high-capacity fixed stations requires navigating years of utility upgrades, trenching, and local permits, how do these massive commercial and rideshare fleets get the power they need right now?
The electrical grid itself is the limiting factor here. You cannot simply drop a 10-megawatt, 164-port mega station wherever you want.
Right.
The local distribution grid and transformers physically cannot handle that kind of load without years of expensive, heavily regulated utility upgrades. I mean, transformer lead times alone can be upwards of 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, so to keep fleets moving today, the industry has to bypass the traditional grid entirely.
Which is why we're seeing this major shift toward targeted infrastructure and mobile off-grid power. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, or MassESE, provides a perfect case study here. They aren't just scattering chargers randomly across the map and hoping people use them.
No, they're explicitly targeting the rideshare sector, Uber and Lyft drivers.
Right. MassESE analyzed the geospatial data to determine exactly where these high-mileage drivers live, congregate, and transition between fares.
And based on that data, they are funding 6 specific charging hubs in hyper-targeted locations. Places like Foss Park in Somerville and major grocery store chains like Big Y. They are bringing the infrastructure directly to the user's existing operational footprint.
And they are pairing it with aggressive vehicle incentives, too.
Yeah.
MassESE is offering up to $14,000 in rebates for those same rideshare drivers to purchase an EV.
It's a really smart move.
It is. It's a highly strategic one-two punch. Drastically lower the barrier to entry for the vehicle and guarantee that the fuel is located exactly where the driver already spends their time.
And they are also looking beyond traditional permanent chargers. MASEC awarded a $1 million grant to a company called SparkCharge to deploy mobile off-grid DC fast-charging hubs directly at retail sites.
This concept completely breaks my mental model of what a charging station is supposed to be.
Oh, totally.
I use this analogy. Traditional fixed charging stations are like brick-and-mortar restaurants. You have to purchase the real estate, secure the zoning permits, dig up the foundation to upgrade the electrical plumbing, and survive a year of construction delays before you serve a single customer.
Right.
Mobile chargers, on the other hand, are the food trucks of the EV world. They are nimble, you can instantly deploy them to wherever the hungry crowds happen to be that day, and you completely bypass the bureaucratic red tape of permanent construction.
The food truck analogy is a perfect way to visualize it. And, this strategy is scaling rapidly. Take the company Exos, for example. They recently secured a $3 million order for 12 of their towable charger hubs from a leading autonomous fleet operator.
Okay, but how does an autonomous fleet actually use a towable charger logistically?
Well, think about how a robotaxi fleet operates. The cars are constantly circulating in specific urban zones. Instead of forcing those cars to drive 20 deadhead miles out to a massive permanent charging hub on the outskirts of town.
You would just be wasting battery and time.
Yeah, exactly. The operator uses a standard pickup truck to tow an Exos hub into a vacant lot right in the center of the high-demand service zone. The robotaxis cycle through and charge locally.
That makes so much.
And when demand shifts to a different part of the city for a special event or a weekend, they simply hitch the battery back up to a truck and move the infrastructure to the new hotspot. These hubs hold between 210 and 630 kilowatt hours of capacity.
Oh, wow.
You drop it, turn it on, and immediately start charging with zero trenching and zero grid interconnection delays.
It is literally a giant battery on wheels that charges other batteries on wheels.
Yes, exactly.
And the application isn't just for commercial robotaxis in a city center either. Exos is demonstrating this exact technology to the U.S. Air Force for defense operations.
Because in military logistics, relying on a local commercial power grid, especially in a remote or contested environment, is a severe tactical vulnerability.
Yeah, if the grid goes down, your electrified fleet is paralyzed.
Right. Precisely. A mobile, high-power DC fast-charging unit that can be deployed from a transport plane and instantly power vehicles completely independent of local infrastructure is an absolute necessity for modern defense operations.
The potential scale of this pivot is wild. The mobile energy storage market is projected to explode from $58 billion in 2025 to over $156 billion by 2032.
It's massive growth.
It is. When the traditional infrastructure of the grid cannot move fast enough to support the transition, the market simply innovates a way to route around it.
So if we pull back and synthesize the intelligence from Perrin, the OSTI researchers, Autofleet, MASEC, and Exos, the overarching theme here is adaptation.
Adaptation, definitely.
We are undeniably witnessing a massive explosion in physical hardware. The deployment of chargers is keeping pace with demand. However, the human element, the broken card readers, the software timeouts, the stiff cables, has to catch up to the raw deployment numbers.
Yeah, the user experience needs work.
And while the industry grinds through those user experience growing pains, the physical limitations of our electrical grid are actively birthing a completely new, multi-billion-dollar industry of mobile off-grid power to keep the world moving.
It is a messy, deeply complicated, but undeniably booming transition. And, it leaves me with one final mind-bending concept for you to mull over.
Oh, let's hear it.
Based on this rapid rise of autonomous robotaxis and these massive mobile battery hubs from companies like Exos, what if the future of filling up isn't you driving your car to a charging station at all?
Okay.
What if, while you were sitting at your desk at work, or while you were fast asleep in your bed, an autonomous mobile battery simply drives itself to your parked car, charges it up, and quietly drives away?
Wow. It entirely decouples the vehicle from the destination. The infrastructure comes directly to the user, completely eliminating the concept of a gas station altogether.
Right. It changes the entire paradigm of transportation. We started out talking about the headlines claiming the EV market is stalling, while the concrete is quietly being poured. It turns out not only are the concrete still being poured at record speed, but in the very near future, we might not even need the concrete at all.
That's a great point.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The world of energy is moving incredibly fast, but you are now officially well informed. Catch you next time.